Coming up on this week's show, the Xbox 360 online store is to close, but it's not all bad news.
A massive new Sega kart racer arrives.
And we go inside the world of Williams and Amiga with Sam Dicker.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each and every Friday with our wonderful mates at Bitmap Books. Now, their latest volume, everyone is loving this at the moment, N64, a visual compendium containing over 150 titles that defined the Nintendo 64. They're all in there. Super Mario 64, GoldenEye 007, Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, Banjo-Kazooie. So if you want to get hold of your copy and check out the rest of their retro gaming collection, have a look right now on their website at bitmapbooks.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 427, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And very nice to have you joining us for the podcast that every single Friday celebrates everything about the golden age of video games, reminiscing about classic consoles, classic computers, and of course, bringing you right up to speed on all the big happenings from the world of retro from over the last 7 days. And as we record this on Thursday evening, glorious sunshine outside the window. Anyone got their milky white legs out yet?
I almost did. I had to go to the post office the other day to post some books out, funny enough, to some Patreons.
Yes.
And I almost kept my shorts on because I was just wearing like jogging shorts around the house. And I was like, no, I will put my jeans on. It's not quite warm enough yet.
What was that awful phrase? Is your beach body ready or something like that?
Beach bod ready. Yeah. Sun's out, guns out, and all that.
That's the one, yeah. I think Ravi was walking around town topless earlier, that right?
No, I did see one guy, like this always happens in England, like as soon as there's a tiny bit of sun, someone whips their top off and walks around and yeah, I did see one guy in town.
But you know us guys, well, normally over summer I'm hunched up indoors playing video games. That's what this podcast is about. We're in a sweaty arcade somewhere. And actually today, talking of the arcade, we've got an incredible guest, an interview that you guys did a couple of weeks ago. Must admit I was right in the throes of the man flu when you did this interview, so I was gutted I couldn't be on it, but listening back, my God, what a guest. So today we're going to be joined by Sam Dicker. Now, talking about the arcade, he worked at Williams back in the day.
Yeah, so Sam was absolutely amazing because he worked at Williams and, he has his roots in pinball as well because there's that huge link with pinball and arcades back in the days. Williams, of course, they did some absolutely amazing stuff, but they had that arcade division and, he worked on Defender with Eugene Jarvis. Wow. He also worked on Sinistar as well with RJ Michael, and the whole kind of interview we talk about the development from those really early days of digitized sound because Sinistar had that amazing vocals in there.
I think as you put it in the interview, the voice it gave a whole generation of kids' nightmares.
Yeah, totally. And how he kind of had this huge background in sound and how that helped with synthesis and then him moving into that video game world. Eventually, he went on to Amiga as well. And this was the very early days of Amiga. So, he was working there and he helped develop the sound drivers and, helped with the original Boing Ball demo as well. So this is really early days of Amiga as well. So it's a absolutely fascinating interview because he's worked with so many amazing people, Noah Faustine, Jack Hager, Larry DeMar. It's just a great kind of length of history that he's worked in the industry. And we're also going to do another interview with him later on because, he was involved with Sound Blaster as well because he went on to Creative Labs. So, having Sam on the show was amazing. How did you enjoy it, Joe?
I really, really enjoyed it. And, we were on the phone to him for about an hour. And we only got to 1985. He's got such a big career.
Much, yeah.
He also worked at Crystal Dynamics, which we didn't manage to cover. So I was like, we've definitely got to get you on for a part 2. And he was like, yeah, absolutely, I'll come on. But yeah, just hearing all about Sinistar and Defender, which is obviously such an iconic game. And I was talking to a colleague the other day at work who's a little bit older than all of us. And he was saying, have you ever played Defender in the 1980s in the arcade? That's an absolutely superb game. And I was like, funny you should say that.
We had Eugene Jarvis on the show and also Sam Baker.
Yeah, so it was a really, really good interview. And I'm really looking forward to hear how it all came out.
Yeah, and those early days of Amiga as well, 'cause I mean, when he was there, it was basically the Lorraine prototype, wasn't it? Those massive kind of breadboards that were all wire-wrapped. They were showing off at the 1984 CS trade show. So really early days, probably even before Commodore bought them. I think they were still looking for a buyer then, weren't they?
If you watch the history of Amiga video, which is like an official video that they produced, Sam's in that as well. So,
right.
Yeah, he really was there with the OG team. And RJ Michael, of course, went from Williams across to Amiga as well.
Yeah, so such an interesting time in computing and arcades, of course. The arcade really at its peak back then. So really interesting. Part one of our interview with Sam Dicker. Of course, like you said, we're going to have him back on for a part two because such an incredible guest. But he'll be on the show in around 40 minutes from now. Now, if you are a regular listener or if you're new, this is the way the podcast works. We do have a special guest in the second half. But the first half, bit of a roundtable chat about what's been happening in retro from over the last week. We always like to keep our little beady eyes on the news. And this one has been making the headlines in a load of gaming blogs this week, that it is finally the end of the road for the Xbox 360's online store. Now, I must admit, this wasn't much of a surprise.
False advertising, clickbait.
Well, weren't we talking about a lot of 360 games being made available on the Games Pass anyway?
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. You've both got really good points there. So my buddy Jason literally texted me yesterday or the day before a screenshot of like an email he'd just got from Xbox, and he was like, I can't believe this, we can't play Black Ops Online anymore. Not that we've played Black Ops Online in ages, the original one for Xbox.
It's nice to know that you can, isn't it?
It's nice to know you can. Yeah. And I was like, no, it literally says there in the email that they will still be available to download. So it's a bit of it is a bit strange because obviously, like you've just said, Ravi, like last week they announced that they're committed to classic gaming, and Microsoft is going to have a whole division within Xbox of a preservation team who are going to make sure that classic Xbox games are still playable and are still there and the servers are still on. And
so it retains its online and multiplayer services.
Yeah, so pretty much
360. Yeah.
So they're not shutting down the Xbox 360 store. What they're going to do is they're going to make it so you can't buy anything anymore. Yeah. So purchases are going to be taken away, which also means like any of like the films or anything, how you could download, not necessarily like Netflix, but how you could actually buy films.
I think the last one I bought was about 2007 maybe. I
think I actually buy one because I remember there was like a movie and TV app, but
yeah, I did once because it was Halloween and Killer Clowns from Outer Space was on there for like 50p.
Yeah,
like
you say, even do that.
Yeah, like you say, Dan, it was like 2008 or something last time I did that. So they're closing all that. But what they are saying, as you've just said, Ravi, is the online servers are going to remain. So you can still play like Call of Duty Black Ops, Modern Warfare, etc. online. And you can still download content that you already have purchased and owned. So such as the DLC for those games. So the extra levels or the extra zombie maps and stuff. But you won't be able to buy anything. So if you don't already own it, that's it. Like the opportunity is gone. So from July 29th, they are switching all purchases off from the Xbox 360 storefront, which I just find that a bit strange because of like, obviously I don't work for Xbox. I don't work for any sort of like, front end like purchasing or anything like that. But surely if the ability to still be there and for it to be downloaded and it still exist within like their cloud or whatever, surely like the payment system can still exist as well. I don't get it. Like it's there to be downloaded.
It might be security issues even.
It could be.
Doing payments on that system.
Or the licensing that comes with it. It's the start of a
phasing out of it because like it is 19 years old and you still got the ability to play that online, which with other systems you really don't. They just cut it and go.
Yeah.
Like look at the Wii U. Had its services just taken away. So the fact it's still online is pretty amazing. Maybe it's a security thing, or maybe they're just like, we're not getting enough purchases. It's not even worth keeping this open, for us financially.
Well, to me, that generation was, really the last generation where pretty much all my games, I've got a few of the, the Xbox arcade games that I bought.
Yeah.
but pretty much all my collection on the 360 was physical. So I didn't really buy many digital games on that system anyway. So yeah, I don't know if you found a different experience, Joe. But
I agree. It's absolutely the same for me. That the majority of it, probably 99%, if not all of it, was physical. Because I'm a physical games guy anyway. So I still don't have many digital games that haven't been on like Game Pass or whatever. But for me, it's the DLC side of things. So it's, your extra Call of Duty maps.
Yeah, I think it's the in-game purchases. That's another thing as well. But I can honestly not see anyone saying, come around to my house, let's download some Microsoft movies and watch the latest thing tonight.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. Like, yeah, it's dead. Like, I don't know many people who even use it to this day even on the modern, Xboxes. But so I can imagine why they would get rid of that on 360. But I just think, like I say, I think it's strange, especially like with the resurgence of all of like Fallout, for example. Like Fallout's literally got like 1 million extra players at the moment because of the TV show.
Yeah.
And people are buying it they're buying all of them, I say the modern ones, but not the originals for PC, but they're buying like Fallout 3 and onwards, which were 360 games and PS3 games. And they have so much DLC. They have like, so many more like extra add-ons and campaigns and stuff like that. Well, if you don't already own that and you weren't a fan of Fallout until you watched the TV show and you want to go back and watch that, you're now going to have to buy the Game of the Year edition, which is like 35, 40 quid. Whereas you can buy a copy of Fallout 3 for like £2 from Kex.
That said, I did see they put them all on Game Pass. They're all on there.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Yeah. And I think it's a good kind of like you said, get it for £2. It's a good system to collect for as well. And the same with the original Xbox, but they're starting to go up.
Yeah.
In value. So right. I think this kind of 360 and PS3 era.
It would be interesting to see the stats on how many people are actually playing, original 360 consoles online. Because I know obviously you can emulate the 360 using modern Xboxes, which is the way that all 360 games on Game Pass work. And I've not downloaded any of those Fallout games from Game Pass yet, but I imagine in circumstances like that, they generally do include the DLC anyway, don't they? When they put like these editions on Game Pass,
I think they do. I'm not 100% sure on that one actually, but I'm pretty sure they do. Yeah.
I guess Microsoft would like to just kind of direct people. If you want to play the big 360 games, get Game Pass, we'll put them on there. I guess that's kind of the route that rather you went down. But good to see they're still keeping it online though. It's only a partial closure. So
it's a bit like payphones. The less people that use them, they're going to get rid of the payphones. So maybe with these online services, they'll start just having elements disappearing.
Yeah, I imagine that's probably the case. They're just not selling enough to warrant, the support and keeping it online, I guess, the digital sales of 360 games now. But if you do want to get hold of some, if you have got some more Call of Duties and you want to get those maps, that DLC downloaded, you've got a couple of months left. July 29th is when the 360 marketplace closes. Now, I'm a big fan of flash carts on my retro systems. Pretty much all of my cartridge-based consoles, I've got EverDrives and combinations of flash carts on them, rather than playing original games, generally the way I like to play them. Because to me, it's kind of the best of both worlds. You don't need a big, expensive game collection, but you're still playing the games as they were on the original hardware. And this one is very cool, though. This is a new open source flash cart for the Nintendo 64 that offers a few nice additions.
So this is the Summer Cart 64. And
I like the name.
I'm surprised this hasn't already been done. Because I kind of had to ask you guys before we started recording. I was like, okay, so it's a flash drive, it's an EverDrive kind of thing. What else does it really do? And the main thing for me, other than the open source part, which you'll have to explain a little bit more for me, is that it has the ability to play the 64DD games.
Yeah.
Which obviously the 64DD never came out outside of Japan and was a big flop in Japan as well. And there's not too many games for it either. But I was surprised to hear that there hadn't already been, an EverDrive / flash cart that could play those games. Because obviously, I get it, we don't have the 64DD, so it makes things a little bit more complicated. But obviously, a few years ago, they made that Mega Drive flash cart where you could actually play Mega CD games just off the cart on a normal Mega Drive. So it's essentially the same thing from what I understand, but I was just surprised it hadn't already been done.
Well, it may have been done looking at, I'm checking out some videos now. There's people doing it on the EverDrive X7, saying playing Nintendo 64 DD games on there. I must admit my EverDrive for my N64 is like the OG one. I've had it about 12 years, and it wasn't supported on mine. So, yeah, I mean, I must admit I'm not too familiar with the N64 DD library. There's only, 10 games ever came out on that system?
It's not many. It's some of them were just like an enhanced version of F-Zero X and an enhanced version of like Mario 64.
Yeah.
And then it was like Doshin the Giant and I want to say Animal Crossing and a couple of others.
But I think this is cool because it also supports like a flash card. It's not just for the DD. It's like an Evercade. You know, you can have NTSC PAL games on there, like just all of them for the N64, and also like homebrew and stuff. So you can have that option of the DD stuff, but also all your other stuff. And I can imagine collecting for the DD is going to be expensive. Yeah. This is like $108 for just a PCB, and then you can 3D print a shell or get one. I can imagine DD carts alone go for that, let alone the drive.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen a DD in person, and I've been kind of looking a bit more into this while we're chatting. Then, you know, some people are saying if you want to run DD games on the X5 or the X7 EverDrives, you can do that, but you've got to convert them to a different format. So it looks like maybe this is just a bit more plug and play than previous solutions, making it a bit more accessible. But yeah, the good thing about this is basically, you know, this new flash cart is completely open source. So they've got this on GitHub at the moment. There is, you know, basically if people want to make their own versions of it, they've even got the project up there on PCBWay, so you can download it and make it yourself. Which, you know, I think in terms of previously those kind of closed source solutions, you've been reliant on one company kind of supporting them, but now kind of throwing this out to everybody, meaning that people can build their own, I think it's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, and I think, you know, people could have extra features on there. So they've got a little app which is called the SC64 deployer, and that means you can kind of put ROMs onto there from the PC, load them on. So maybe I'm thinking, you know, in the future, someone could probably have a wireless board in there or Bluetooth or something, and then just fire a ROM onto it. And yeah, that would be pretty fast because it's got fast I/O.
Nice.
You know, yeah, the options with open source are really cool, and people can kind of experiment and play with it, you know.
That is a nice way of doing it, because I know with the PlayStation 2, for example, that's one way, you know, that I've played games on there, kind of hosting them on my NAS and send them over the network, which will be quite a nice way to play in 64 games. Rather than having to, you know, do sneakerware, as they call it, don't they? Putting it on an SD card and walking across the room and plugging it into your system. So we're a bit spoiled sometimes. But yeah, it looks very cool. I mean, there are some retailers that are making them already. Price of them doesn't look too bad. So if you want to get them from, there's Phenom Mod. They sell them for $108, completely assembled, in a nice little case as well, an injection molded shell. Which, you know, in terms of pricing, I think that generally does seem... Actually, it seems a little bit cheaper, I think, than some of the other ones I've seen. So, you know, because you've got to bear in mind, if I always think of these flash carts, I often see people complain that, oh, they're expensive, but you think for the price of a couple of games, you can buy one of these, can't you, and then have the entire library on them. I know some purists are like, oh, I like to have the originals on the shelves, but yeah, the more consoles I get and the less space I get, you know, it is a nice way of... just playing the full library. Although you do get that kind of doom scrolling fatigue. I do find that is a bit of an issue with it sometimes. You load it up and there's like, 500 games there. You're like, which one do I play today? Or you end up playing 10 seconds of each one. Right, next.
Well, that's fine with the DD because there's 10 games.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, like I said, I'm pretty happy with my my EverDrive on my N64 to play the original games on there, but I think if you're curious about playing some N64 DD games in hopefully a more simple way on your original system, these are available now, so I'll link that up in the show notes as well. Now, this is probably the most impressive homebrew game that I've seen for a long time, and I must admit, when I first saw this, I was a little bit confused. I thought, has this been like a game in the past? Is this kind of an updated port? Because there is a trailer that actually sounds like it could have been made back in 1994. So let me play you the trailer first. Have a listen to this.
Hang up your sneakers because Dr. Robotnik and his ex-enemies are going go-karting. Use the untapped potential of rings to supercharge your vehicle across more than 200 crazy courses. With over 20 unique items and some of the hottest moves on this side of the floating island, this is racing at the next level. Dr. Robotnik's Ring Racers. Out now for home computers everywhere.
I would love it if it was like available at Toys R Us or something at the end. It's so 90s. It reminds me of like those, cinema trailers, like film trailers where it's like in a world.
Yeah.
Like,
But you need the VHS like over the top.
Yeah.
Or like a little
What
They
Wow.
have got,
Wow.
if you watch the trailer, it does actually look like that. Yeah. So
It looks
little
like
bit of
that,
a
yeah.
warp, yeah.
Yeah. Nah, man, this looks it looks fantastic. Yeah. So Dr. Robotnik's Ring Racers, if anybody missed that, it is a homebrew game, unfortunately. But it looks like a proper full release, doesn't it?
I don't think, unfortunately, I think this is good because it's free. And
Well,
it's
yeah,
also-
this is true. This is very, very
The
true.
only downside is Sega might take it down because you know what the
This
big
is
like
also
Razorback,
very
yeah.
true. So
Yeah.
get out there and get it downloaded. I've not had a play yet. It sounds and looks a little bit overwhelming to me because there's 200 tracks,
Yeah.
over 20 different items. It's in the vein of Mario Kart, but obviously it's Sonic, and it is full on Sonic. Like the levels are like they've captured the Sonic vibe, 90s Sonic vibe, like massively. Fully 3D kind of like levels as well, with like 2D elements in there and 2D sprites, and even down to like the only way I can describe it is kind of like it looks a little bit like the bonus levels from Sonic CD,
Yeah.
but in kart mode. But it feels a little bit overwhelming to me because there's so much content in there. But you've actually had a bit of a play of it, haven't you, Dan? And you said it's a little bit on the hard side or a little bit on
Well,
the...
it's hard to get into
Every
because
game's hard for them.
Well,
yeah, you know that, guys. But I mean, I did download this. Yeah, 'cause it is free. You can download it for Windows and Mac.
Yeah.
And it's on GitHub as well, so it's open source, and also there's a Linux version too. But yeah, if you want to download it and play it, I mean, I downloaded this and I thought I'd have a quick blast of it before we started recording. So I sat there for like 10 minutes. I'm going through the tutorial. I was like, well, there's nothing else going on. I'm playing as a Robotnik and I'm driving around, and Tails is kind of on the walkie-talkie to me, give me instructions. And then I thought, well, this is obviously just a training mode of it. And then I got to about 15 minutes. I thought, well, I've got to jump off this now. Then I thought, well, I want to see what the gameplay's like. So I found a YouTube video, and it turns out, the first part of the game is an unskippable tutorial
Right.
that lasts 40 minutes.
Oh.
So you need to play all of that tutorial for 40 minutes before you get into the game by the looks of it, which, considering it's unskippable at the moment, is a bit of an oversight. I mean, it's not a complicated game by the looks of it. It's just a kart racer.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure why
that is a
would be
little bit
necessary.
overwhelming.
Yeah. Talking about overwhelming things. So
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know. I don't know if that's an oversight or if it is, maybe it has got more complicated game mechanics than we think, but the game has literally been made by like an entire Sonic community who claim, and I say claim, I completely believe this, have put thousands of hours of work into this. And I completely believe it because the quality of the game looks absolutely fantastic. Even down to that trailer that you just played sounds so legit. Like, there's so much love gone into this. So that does sound a bit much, 40-minute introduction.
I mean, either I was being thick, I was looking for a way to skip it, and then I checked on some of the comments on the YouTube trailer. Other people were saying the same thing.
Right.
So I imagine either it's buried somewhere in some menu I couldn't find, or it's just an oversight that they'll patch in like the next release of it, I'm sure, after feedback. But yeah, I mean, looking at like you said, a massive list of courses, loads of playable characters. They've got like a Grand Prix mode as well. You got, CPU opponents, multiple difficulty levels. You've got loads of weapons on here. Split screen multiplayer with up to 4 players. You can play online with up to 16 players as well. Time attack mode. Loads of secrets buried in the game as well. And the game, I mean, obviously I was only playing the tutorial, but in terms of the controls, it felt, really nice and tight and really easy to control and really polished. So the fact that this is, a free game is kind of insane. I mean, obviously having these Sega IPs in there, I imagine that's the reason they obviously couldn't charge for anything like this.
Yeah, of course.
Sega would be straight on them. But for just a group of homebrew developers to come up with something of this quality, I think it's pretty jaw-dropping. So I mean, I love kart racing games anyway, and to me this looks like, how amazing would it have been to get something like this on the Saturn back in the day.
Well, we got Sonic R.
Which I never liked Sonic R. I mean, it's I think 'cause I always played as Sonic, and apparently he's the worst character to play in Sonic R.
Oh, okay. I've never actually played Sonic R.
I find that really difficult to control. It's like
I'm going to get a few haters for that, I think. But I think it's a very Marmite kind of game, Sonic R. But I think this looks fantastic. Obviously, there was a Sonic Racers for Game Gear as well, but they were not on this level.
No.
But Twitter, the video on Twitter's already got 10,000 likes, and we've got almost 75,000 plays on the trailer for it on YouTube. So I would go download this while you can.
Yeah,
for sure.
Because Sega have been a bit funny recently. I mean, it used to only be Nintendo, didn't it? But I know they have been, taking down a few fan homebrew stuff and books and things recently as well. So yeah, if you are all interested in this, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's always pointless doing that because once it's online, it's there forever anyway, isn't it?
True.
There's always links. So I mean, it does look very impressive. I think by far one of the most impressive homebrew games we've seen for a long time. So if you like your kart races, could be one worth checking out. Dr. Robotnik's Ring Racers, which I'll link in this week's show notes. Now, speaking of other games that I was playing before we started recording today, I was having a bit of a play in Excel. Did you know there's actually a massive game library for Excel?
I didn't know this, and I feel like you've just opened up like a massive can of worms for all three of us.
Yeah, so we did have Kevin Backus on ages ago that told us about the hidden games within Excel. So Excel 97 had this flight simulator that we all used to activate at school. And of course, the Hall of Tortured Souls, which was that kind of Doom style game within Excel. And, it'd just be pictures of the developers and stuff. But when we were bored at school, we were like, yeah, look, you can play Doom on Excel. But I'm amazed to see that there's like a modern scene using Excel as a platform for gaming.
Well, there's, just looking at some of the games that you can download for Excel, Championship Manager.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
That does make
sense. That really does make sense. Yeah, using Excel for that.
Sonic the Hedgehog.
That makes no sense at all.
No idea
how does that work?
But apparently you can play Tetris, Candy Crush is on there as well. Chess, Battleship, Monopoly.
Are they using emojis and stuff like that?
The Sonic one looks like actually really good graphics, which is insane. So, but the one we're talking about today it's a bit more simplistic than some of these full-on graphic games on Excel, but it just kind of proved that the power of the engine. This is actually a Fallout game, because obviously Fallout, like you said, Joe, it's really in vogue at the moment. Everyone's talking about it thanks to the new TV show. But now someone's made something called Fallout but in Excel that lets you explore a workbook wasteland, is the headline.
The post-apocalyptic land of Mercer.
Yeah.
So it isn't called Fallout, it's called Mercer, but like everything that's in the game is Fallout. So the story of the game is you and your companion have left your vault to go find your overseer who's been kidnapped by like marauders, which is like all Fallout, kind of like lore kind of stuff. But yeah, I've not played it, but I was looking at it and it's like you don't, how does it work? Because you don't like actually have like, you don't like walk around. It's not like it's like screens of Excel. You do?
You do walk around. So
wow.
I mean, it's
okay.
It plays a bit like, I only spent a couple of minutes on it, and I must admit I had like kind of no idea what I was doing. But you kind of go on, you kind of get an overview of the world, from above, and then there's basically cursor controls. You move left and right, and then as you're moving around the world, you kind of bump into enemies, and then there's a combat system in there as well. But kind of like D&D style combat.
Yeah.
Which to me, like, I wasn't really sure what I was doing, if I'm honest. I did manage to win a few battles, which I was, did feel very random, but. Yeah, it was just, it blew my mind that I had a character that I could control and walk around a map.
Well, it's using stuff like the Marcos and the alert systems as well within Excel.
It uses macros, you've got to enable all the macros and stuff.
Marcos.
Yeah, Marco Polos.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing when you do load it up, because I get Excel through work, and it basically threw up a load of security alerts. Basically saying your organisation limits the use of macros, and you had to right-click on it and make it a trusted document and all that, which, if you are using it on, your local area network at work, might flag up some IT alerts, I imagine.
I think Drug Wars would be an obvious one that you could do on this.
Someone must have done that.
Yeah, text adventures and stuff like this, but maybe even SimCity. The first version you could probably do on this with this above view. The impressive thing about it is, you mentioned there's other titles on there. They're obviously using a lot of graphics and stuff like this. This one's really kind of just based on Excel, and it's 2.39 meg for the whole document, which is pretty cool, seeing it at that size.
Yeah, and I think the fact that you can basically play full games in Excel, because you said before, Joe, didn't you? If you've got a busy life and you haven't got time to sit down on your PlayStation 5 of an evening, this could be a solution.
Could be a solution to play at work. I'm not going to, just in case anybody from work is listening. But yeah, it could be the solution. And if anybody walks by, you could just quickly change the tab on your Excel document. It does look crazy. Like, I'm watching the video now, and it's like, yeah, you move around and stuff. It is very Dungeons and Dragons, like you say, and very kind of like text adventure. Well, it isn't, later than text adventure, but I know what I'm trying to say. But yeah, it's very playable, which is surprising. I've got to look this Sonic one up now and maybe have a little blast of that tonight.
Yeah, that is the one that's really intriguing me, how that plays in Excel. I've got a feeling it's going to run at like about 1 frame a minute or something, but I might be wrong. So that's the thing with Excel. I mean, it's I've never been a big fan of Excel. I've do my tax return in it. That's about it, really. But it does seem like there's a lot of kind of hidden power buried away behind those spreadsheets. So there is a whole gaming scene. There's a little rabbit hole for you to go down next time you're in the office. So if you want to download that, it is free, and they are accepting contributions if you want to support their work. So I'll put that in the show notes as well. Fallout, but in Excel. Now, a big headline that you pointed out a bit earlier on this week, Ravi, because I know you were on Amiga Bill stream on Sunday evening. We've had Amiga Bill on the podcast before, and you and I have hung out with him in Germany. Awesome guy, Bill. He's been a big supporter of our podcast since we started. It was nice to hear you on that, because I had a few video issues to see you on the stream on Sunday evening. But you guys mentioned that it was actually, and this kind of slipped my attention, really. I didn't realise the anniversary had come up. That earlier this week, I think it was on Monday, wasn't it, that it was 30 years since Commodore went bankrupt.
Yeah, it's not really a thing to celebrate, but it's
an occasion worth marking, though, I think.
Definitely worth marking, and just to think, one of the world's largest personal computer manufacturers, and then it just disappears off the face of the earth. And 30 years later, people are still loving the machines, and still loving the C64 and the Amiga, and still making games for it as well, which is just absolutely crazy. And just to see such a giant fall down, it was a very tragic collapse and ending as well. I think some of the Commodore assets went off to Tulip Computers.
XCOM got the Amiga for a bit, didn't they?
Yeah, XCOM, then Gateway 2000.
Yeah. It's all a mess after.
If you remember that, it was all a real mess. And now I think there's probably about 4 Commodore companies in the world which are all split up from it and arguing over it. And it's a big mess, but their contribution to the computing world and the gaming world was absolutely huge.
Yeah, and it's there's an interesting article which I'll link on a website I must admit I wasn't familiar with, called heis.de, which is a German website. Interestingly, they show some images of the former Commodore plant in Braunschweig, which I believe is I think that's a Commodore museum now.
Yes, yeah, and their old plant in America is the head of QVC.
Yes,
TV. Yeah, which they sold the Jerry Ellsworth's DTV on.
Oh, that Commodore 64 and a joystick thing.
Yeah, it kind of comes around,
Yeah, but I do remember, because it was I did a YouTube video, well, it must have been 10 years ago, when it was the 20th anniversary of Commodore's closure, kind of talking about, my memories of it and stuff as well, which, even that is nuts that it was like a decade ago I did that video, because I vividly remember sitting down and doing that before I went out on a night out. But yeah, I mean, I remember, because I don't know how involved you kind of were with the Amiga scene back then, but I know you used to read the magazines and stuff like I did, Ravi, but I do remember, obviously news travelled a lot slower in that kind of pre-internet era. And I remember one of my friends at school who, my friend Ricky, who by then, I mean, he had Amigas and stuff for a while, but he probably moved into, being a console boy by then. He had a Mega Drive and the Mega CD and everything. I think I've talked about him before. He was a guy whose parents got divorced, and basically they'd just kind of buy him all the latest gadgets to kind of try and win favour. He had a CD TV for a while, and he had a full Japanese Mega Drive set up with a Mega CD1 and 32X and everything on it. But I remember he was the first person who told me, he said, Amiga's gone bankrupt. I was like, no, they haven't. You're talking nonsense. And then I don't think I read about it in the magazines until a month or two later.
with me, it was kind of like we were already scavenging off the remains of Commodore, and we were like, right, we can get cheap hardware. We can get all this stuff, people are selling off their machines. And that was kind of where I flourished. So I knew it was going to happen, and it was just a case of when, because you could see it all on the decline. Stuff started to fall apart, and it's really sad. But I think a lot of people got into the later thing, and I think it's amazing that people have such passion for it nowadays.
But I remember the magazines were almost in denial because we were a bit like, it's like I remember Amiga format and CEO Amiga being like, it's not a big deal. It's not going to affect the UK. It's just a parent company.
Well, even 5 years later, an absolutely rubbish game would come out, and they'd be like, the best, 90%. Yeah. And they had a big bit of delusion, especially when it went through SCOM and then Gateway, and it was just all a big mess, really, wasn't it?
Well, when I stuck with the Amiga as my main machine until 2001. And then I kind of completely left the scene. Got back into it again about 2007. So I kind of missed that kind of, all the wars and stuff and the next generation stuff that came along. But I think in terms of someone who, was into the Amiga back when it was like, the biggest computer in the playground, like you said at the start there, Ravi, it does kind of feel like, 30 years later, the scene feels more alive now than it ever has.
100%, yeah.
So,
it's doing really well.
Yeah. I can hear Joe snoring now, so let's wake him up. Enough Amiga chat.
But you're going to be.
That's the thing when you come into Ravi's Kickstart event. You're kind of in the Amiga scene now by default. Hanging out with us.
Guilty by association, it seems.
Exactly,
yeah. We hope a bit of osmosis happens, and Joe slowly becomes an Amiga fan.
Yeah, but hacking Zorro cards into his Amiga 2000.
I will be there. And I will be flogging Sega Mega Drives and getting some funny looks.
One day you will love Zool.
I loaned Joe my Amiga 500 Mini. You couldn't get to grips with Zool, could you? You said I can't get past the first part of level one.
Don't embarrass me like that, Dan. But I couldn't get past like the first like wall jump, and I can't even remember what it was you told me you had to do in the end. But I was
just jump away from the wall and cling back to it.
Yeah, I was being completely stupid because that's even in like Mega Man X and stuff, and it didn't even figure that out.
Just after like an hour, like I couldn't get past the wall. So,
cheers for that, mate.
So I just thought I'd mention that. So incredible to see that 30 years later, the Commodore and Amiga scene obviously is flourishing so much. And we're coming to your event hopefully on Saturday, doing the Robin Hood Amiga meet in Nottingham. So,
and we've got some great Amiga stories with our guest as well coming up.
We have. So 30 years since Commodore went under, but like you said, it's still alive and thriving. So if you want to read more about that, I'll link that article, nice little read, in the show notes, along with everything else. You don't have to Google around. I save you the effort. Head to the website, theretrohour.com, or just check the podcast show notes on your app. Okay, then. So, patrons, stay tuned. We have got some extra news stories on the way for you in just a moment. We do that every week on the podcast. We give our patrons a couple of extra news stories because obviously we chop all the adverts out of the patrons version. So that is one good reason that you should be joining our patrons community. And there are plenty of other good reasons as well, aren't there, Joe?
There is, absolutely.
I was wondering who he was going to pick on this time.
He's going to pick on me. Absolutely. We always have our hangout, our chat, and the last Sunday of every month where everybody's welcome who's a patron to come and have a virtual hangout with us, a bit of a drink, a bit of a tipple, where we just kind of, talk about, anything and everything, to be perfectly honest. Sometimes we end up talking about our latest After Hours episode that we've just done. Last month we did our top five games that weren't video games, and that became a real talking point. This month, I believe it's out this week.
Yes.
Our latest After Hours episode, which is our top 5 kind of digital tech movies, which was my idea, and I kind of struggled with it. But I think you two did.
Easy for me. I was like, I'll rattle my list off in about 2 minutes.
You guys. But that was really, really fun as well. But yeah, plenty of reasons to sign up. There's 40, how many episodes is there now?
43, I think there is of the After Hours
43
podcast.
Episodes you'll get. Some of them, are about 2 hours long as well. And recently we have been trying out video on that as well. So any feedback on there would be great. If you do want to check it out and have a little, put it on in the background, have a listen, have a little look, see if it's worth while for us to do, and maybe incorporate that into the main podcast.
Yeah, that's kind of the plan.
We can get
and also, if you want to get hold of our book as well, we have got some of those available for our patrons, because we do get a lot of people inquiring, can we get hold of one of the Retro Hour books? Obviously, we kickstarted about 18 months ago. At the moment, they are available for the same price as our Kickstarter backers, exclusive to our patrons, and we were hoping to open it up to the general public soon, which obviously will be slightly more expensive, but if you want to get a good bargain on it, good time to sign up and support the podcast as well on our Patreon page. All the details are at theretrohour.com. And of course, we do welcome new members of our patrons community into the most prestigious high score table in the world of retro gaming, and that is the Retro Hour Hall of Fame.
Hall of Fame!
We have got 3 new members to welcome this week. Thank you so much to David Law,
Bill Tyler,
and James and Marie,
who all joined us on Patreon over the last week. We massively appreciate your support. And if you'd like to join our wonderful patrons community, come on the Hangouts. Hang out in our exclusive Discord as well. We're chatting in there all throughout the week. All the details are at theretrohour.com. Okay, then, well, thank you for checking out the news this week. We'll update you again on what's been happening next Friday, and keep it here going inside the world of Williams, classic arcade scene, and, of course, early days at Amiga as well, and lots more with our special guest, Sam Dicker. He's next on the Retro Hour podcast.
You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and we're here today with Sam Dicker, and he's from Williams Electronic Games Inc., Amiga as well. Fantastic arcade titles like Defender and Sinistar, and also, of course, the Boing Ball demo, which we all absolutely love. And welcome on, Sam.
Yeah, hello. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you here, and we always start the podcast with a kind of open question, which was, what's your first gaming experience that you remember? The first time you got took by gaming.
It's going to have to be. I'm going to have to say some of the arcade machines that I played when I was supposed to be studying at college back in '75. They were really early coin-op games that had just very primitive graphics, like there was a driving game that just showed the poles on the side of the road going by, and things like that. At that time, I didn't really get that hooked on the video games. I was more of a pinball player back then. I was very interested in the playing pinball machines, and I got pretty good at it, but not competitively good, but good enough that I'd sometimes beat the games. I remember I liked playing some of the really good mechanical games. It was mainly, back then it was mainly, in the college dorms, and it was mainly how well the machines were maintained. Some of them were in terrible shape. They had flippers that sometimes didn't work. They weren't level, the play fields and stuff, and so if I got one that actually worked well, that was my favorite game.
And were you kind of fascinated with the sound as well? Because, they can be very loud, a room full of pinball machines.
So, I wasn't that fascinated by the sound of the pinball machines. I liked the sounds because they kind of made the playing the game a lot more fun. But as far as the sounds themselves weren't particularly interesting.
Well, you were interested in electronics as well, and how did that start? Were you like playing around with calculators and stuff like that?
I was very, very lucky. My parents, my father was an engineer, and he actually ran a civil engineering firm. But he had a lot of his friends and coworkers, and I'd go into the office and I'd talk to them and see what they were doing. And they were into all kinds of different, they worked in a bunch of different engineering disciplines, but I mainly really got interested in electricity and electronics at a very young age, and was always, finding things that people would throw out, the broken radios. And actually, even before that, when I was really little, I used to take apart clocks, and I wanted to know how things worked. But I got interested in electronics, and I would take apart old TVs that people would throw out and collect, and all the parts, and I'd try to make other circuits out of them. And my parents really supported me. I had for many years when I was a kid, I had a subscription to Popular Electronics, and
great magazine.
And I would just look at all the different projects, and I would fantasize about making a laser or something. And I did mainly built really simple things, you know, just with a handful of components. But I loved that kind of stuff when I was little. And I always had like at least one friend who was also interested in science, who I would do things with.
Yeah, I had an interest in mathematics as well.
Yeah, definitely. I would look at books of math puzzles and solve math problems. And I liked how, kind of like electronics gave me something that I could do with the math. You know, I could, that I could see results. And I think, and one of my father's employees who ran the lab. He had an old oscilloscope that he gave me. It mostly worked, but I managed to fix it, and that was one of my favorite toys when I was in. I think I must have been in 4th grade at that time, and I think that when I connected that with the sound, and I could see the waveforms from the sound, that was really fun, and I think that kind of planted a seed in my brain about, you know, waveforms and sound, and I was always interested in sound. But I also was interested in graphics, but there weren't really, I didn't really have access to computer graphics when I was at that age. So all I could do was, like, if I wanted to see something graphical, I'd have to make a waveform and put it up on the oscilloscope.
And how did you know Larry DeMar?
He was actually in Sunday school with me, and it was really lucky because. You know, I don't know if you remember in RJ's story, he had a really hard time getting Williams to hire him.
Yeah.
And I happened to go in there, and my first interview was with Eugene and Larry. And Larry was like, Sam, you know, it's like, and so I mean, that's definitely the value of that was definitely a stroke of luck.
Yeah, definitely.
And he was, you know, he was definitely one of the rock stars at Williams, and at that time, and he must have put a good word in for me because they hired me right away, even though I didn't have a whole lot of experience in the job, you know, in jobs working with, you know, microprocessors.
Because he did the programming for Black Knight as well.
Yeah. It was actually because he was working on. He's a great programmer, brilliant, and he was working on an operating system. The next version of the software they were going to run, that Williams wanted to run on their game system, the pinball machines. I can't remember what it was. Pinball. It was some acronym, and he was working on that at the time when Williams was doing their first video game. When Eugene was working on what became Defender, and Eugene needed help. He wanted someone to work with him, and it would have been Larry, except Larry had to finish this operating system. So they asked me if I wanted to work on the video game. It probably took half a millisecond for me to answer yes to that.
Well, I guess there was a foundation there of like, digital pinball sounds as well, and synthesis and like, you know, soundboards. And,
yeah, well, the soundboard story is a really interesting one. To use a microprocessor just for sound, you know, that was that was a big deal. But when you add up the cost and the maintenance of the electronics that you needed to run solenoids, and the mechanical chimes, the 8-bit soundboard that they developed at Williams before I started may have been a cost saving or may have been equal. I'm not sure, but I do remember that I was really impressed that they had this soundboard that you could make all kinds of sounds with. I'm guessing that, and I don't know this for sure, but you know, Eugene may know, but I'm guessing that, actually I seem to remember a story that when they first developed the soundboard, the expectation was that it would make chime noises, just like the mechanical chimes, you know, like a decaying sine wave. Yeah. But Gene and Eugene, and I'm not sure if there were other programmers who worked on sound, but they said, oh, we can do a lot more interesting stuff than that. And when I first started at Williams, that was my first assignment, was to make more sounds for pinball.
Did you work much with RJ? And do you have any fond memories of the time spent with him?
Yeah. Actually, RJ joined while we were working on Sinistar. and I think he did the mouth animation for the Sinistar, and all kinds of other stuff. I mean, there were a lot. It was a very chaotic time getting that game together. There were so many pieces, different people working on different parts of the software, and that was his first project. And I really liked working with him. He was a lot of fun.
What was like the culture like at Williams then? Was it like a kind of family vibe when you were all working in these little teams? And what was the attitude towards the arcades at Williams as well when those teams started to grow separately from the pinball division?
Oh, that's a good question, boy. And I'm not sure I can give you a unbiased answer, just because I was very focused on, as always, I tend to take on a project and I just get so focused on the nuts and bolts, and I put my head down and I work on stuff, and I kind of lose track of what's going on around me. And but I do remember that the culture actually changed a lot after Defender, because Defender was their first in-house game, the video game that they worked on, and this is a company that had been making pinball for decades, and there was a whole culture around the pinball development, with game designers being kind of at the top of the hierarchy. And then there were folks who would make the prototype, the play fields, and people working on the electronics, and lots of different teams. But it was a very, very pinball centric culture. And the video game project was something totally out of the blue, that totally not part of the pinball culture. I remember early on that Eugene was not real confident in what he was working on, and people would come by and look at some of the very earliest prototypes of the game that he had up and running, and we weren't sure it was going to work, that it was going to be fun, that he was going to come up with anything. But he had a very positive attitude and kept trying different things, and I remember that we moved to working at another building. We weren't working at their main headquarters, where they had an engineering office upstairs in the front of the building, and then they had the assembly line where they made the pinball machines. And they opened up another building to make the video game consoles, video game cabinets, and that was I don't know, must have been a mile away or something. It was another kind of it seemed like the factories back then, they had like offices up in the front for all the management, and then they had the factory floor in the back. In this case, because they were just using it for assembling the games, the whole area where the offices were was empty. And so I think Eugene and I each took these large rooms that were, with maybe a room between us, and this big empty dark space, and that's where we worked on Defender.
Was it interesting with people like Larry DeMar before? They were seen as, these kind of great designers of pinball machines and pinball games, and then suddenly the arcade, you had a fairly unknown people at the top, at the head, designing it as well. Was that quite a drastic change?
Well, I think there was a big shock within the company when Defender came out and it was so successful. They sold so many. At that time, I think the biggest selling pinball game in Williams history must have been in the tens of thousands, maybe 10,000, maybe 20,000 at the most. And Defender ended up selling something like 55,000 games. Wow. And so it was just like, it was a shock to the company that there was so much focus had now shifted. They wanted to really focus on video games as well as keeping the pinball group going. But there wasn't really any kind of, the folks who were working on pinball and the people working on video games weren't competing with each other. I remember that the pinball designers would come over and look at what we were working on in the video games, and they gave us lots of good ideas and feedback, and we go in, and we were all pinball players, so we go play the pinball games too, and we play the prototypes and tell them what we thought, what we liked and didn't like. So it was a very, very collegial atmosphere.
That's really good. And I guess you had lots of games to play on there.
Yeah, we always had a game room with some of our games and some of our pinball games, and we had a couple of because there weren't any other video games, so we had a couple of video games from other companies that we were playing with, that we would play with and we get ideas from. And I'm sure that when you interviewed Eugene, he talked about some of his influences.
That was actually going to be my next question. Was there, when the idea of like, okay, we're going to move into doing video games, we're going to do Defender, was there kind of like pressure of like, we want it to be like this arcade game, this is Pac-Man, this is Space Invaders, did the higher ups start bringing those arcade cabinets in for you guys to test and stuff? Was there much of a culture change? Or?
No, I don't think, I don't necessarily know why they were there. Whether they were there, I never heard anyone tell me that from management tell me that they wanted us to make things that were like this in this game and this in the other game. So I mean, maybe they thought, and maybe the electrical guys opened them up to see how they were maybe manufactured. I don't know. I don't really know why they were there, but I do know that that when I was working with Eugene, he had a lot of thoughts about, can we do something like this? Can we do something like that? Between us, we would talk about that. I think my first assignment when I was working on the video game, which was became Defender. Yeah. Was Eugene wanted me to make an explosion effect for when when a bomb would hit an enemy ship or an enemy player and blow up. And I think it was Galaxian. Yeah, we had a Galaxian machine, and and he showed me the explosion in Galaxian. I think it was 3 frames of animation that were the size of one of the sprites, and it would just put up this little 3 sprite animation pattern, and it would always it was always the same pattern. And I had this thing where, I mean, I've always have, and that's never changed. I always like to come up with something new or different. Look at it. Is there another way to do this? That's when I had the idea for the primitive particle effects of blowing up the ships and making the pixels actually spread apart, because I hadn't seen that before, at least not in raster, on a raster game. So that's what I wrote. That's the first piece of code that I wrote in Defender, was the explosion. Oh wow! And, not the player explosion. The first one I wrote was the explosions of all the ships, and it would just basically, originally it would just take the sprite, the bitmap of the ship, of whatever thing you blew up, and just I think it broke the pixels into like blocks of 2 by 2 pixels, and it would just take those pixels and spread them apart over each frame, increasing the distance. For the larger objects, it looked pretty cool. And I really didn't like the idea of having every explosion look the same. So what I did was, in my little piece of code, this little piece of code that I wrote, you would specify where on the object the bomb had hit, and it would kind of blow up from that point. So if you hit it on the left side, it would blow out to the right, or if you hit it on the top, it would blow out towards the bottom. So what that did was that made each of your explosions look a little different, and I thought that was cool.
And when it would hit it, it would just come to full stop, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well, it would. Yeah, I think it. Yeah, actually, the object, because these were all done in software, we didn't have any blit or hardware. The objects were being drawn on the screen, kind of like they were like software sprites. And what would happen is when the object was destroyed, it would stop drawing the sprite, and it would start calling this little program that I wrote that would explode it. And I think that would start at a fixed position. So even if you were scrolling, it would just explode. I don't think I took the scrolling into account. Like there wasn't any inertia in its movement when it blew up. I don't remember. We're talking about something a piece of code that I wrote in 1980 or I don't remember the details.
Was there much testing done on Defender? Because it was a really fast and tough game.
Yeah, there was a lot of testing. I don't know how much time we spent tuning it. I know that certainly Eugene is a perfectionist, and and I'm sure he did a lot of tuning when he was working on it. I remember that we certainly had a whole test department that had been testing pinball, that tested pinball machines, and now they were testing a video game. And I remember that, I don't know, I think my high score was like 25,000 or something. And I remember there was one tester, I thought I was really good. There was one tester who got 37,000. It was like, wow, people are getting such high scores. We had no idea how good people would get at that game.
It's really tough with an arcade, just getting simplicity there, but also having that feel of having it fresh every single time. And with Defender, it wasn't, set levels. It had a sense of randomness. How was that implemented?
Well, that was something that Eugene really was passionate about. He loved random number generators. And so just about everything, every action in the game, when he needed, where am I going to put this ship? Where is it going to appear? Which way is it going to be going? How many of these things are going to be? When is it going to shoot its bombs? When is it going to change direction? How fast is it going to go? All these things were he would pull a random number from a random number generator and then, do something with it, scale it, whatever, and then use it to make that selection. So it was kind of like the total opposite of a game like Pac-Man, where everything is very scripted. And every game was a unique experience. No two games were the same.
Yeah, and you couldn't have the patterns that you do, and you had to play the game in a total different way.
You had to be present and mindful. You couldn't just like memorize things and just go into robotically move around. I mean, all games you have to do. There's a lot of that, but certainly in Defender, you never knew what was going to happen next. There were times when I'm sure there were a lot of things that were scripted. I mean, there are obviously, but when this thing would occur, but how many of and where the objects would appear, like say, all those things were random.
When you were making it and developing it, did you ever have a feeling that this is going to be a huge hit? Did you ever imagine it was going to be as popular or bigger than the likes of Pac-Man and Asteroids at the time?
I don't know. There were times when I thought we were doing something that was cooler, but there was no way we could tell how successful it was going to be. I mean, there was a lot of concern that the game was too complicated, that it had too many buttons and controls. I mean, at the time that it came out, that was one of the criticisms from it that we got internally. People were worried that it was too complicated.
Yeah,
and players wouldn't be able to figure it out. So there was that. I mean, there were a lot of concerns. But I think that when the first time I knew that we had a hit was when we put Defender, and maybe had a couple of them at our favorite test site where we tested the pinball machines, and the players just lined up to play it, and there were it ran nonstop. And it was so exciting to go in there and watch people play a game that I worked on. And I think that was one of the high points of my career was watching people play Defender that first time I went there. I have a fond memory of someone standing there. They put in their quarter, and the game must have lasted 20 seconds. The whole game was over. And while the final ship was blowing up, he was reaching into his pocket for the next quarter. Just immediately like, I got to try this again. I got to try this again, instead of like being really mad at the game. And because I know that he got some entertainment value out of it, even though it was such a short game.
Yeah, and you could have made that game easier and people playing it for longer, but having that kind of short and right, I want to, win this and kind of own this game was a good move. Right.
People, it was challenging for folks who thought anyone who thought they were good. And, for years later, when I'd go to because, by the time the game had been out for a little while, they were everywhere. There was every corner store had one. They were in bars. They were in laundromats. I mean, every place where you could put an arcade piece had a game, and there were a lot of Defenders out there. And I remember that I have one memory for sure of going to it was a convenience store, and there was one kid who was the Defender expert, and he was the much better than the other players, and when I was in there, and somehow it came up, I was talking to him, and somehow it came up that I worked on the game, so of course he had to play me, and and just it was so fun playing someone who really knew how to play the game and had learned it on their own. I think he even had different names for the ships than we used.
That's fantastic, meeting the fans.
Yeah, meeting the fans. So that was thrilling, and that was a kind of a tough act to follow career-wise. Yeah.
Well, that was going to be our next question. So, was there much pressure and expectation kind of put on you then to make sure the next game was going to be a huge hit?
Oh yeah. The once the Defender, once the sales started to decline, as they do, once everyone had bought a Defender that wanted one, there was a lot of pressure to come up with the next game. And Larry and Eugene had gone off and started VidKids, and they their first project was the sequel, Stargate, and they worked on that. But in-house, we needed to work on the next game. So that's when I started working on the game that was they had a couple of teams working on games, but what the game that I was working on became Sinistar.
And did you do a little bit of sound on Stargate as well? I guess it wasn't massively different from Defender sound.
You know what? That was completely. I think that sound was done by the VidKids. I mean, they had access to all the software that we used for Defender, but I know they made some new sounds, and I don't remember who did those sounds, but I kind of guess that they may have been selected. A lot of times sounds for pinball, and I'm guessing the video games teams were mostly done. Sounds were mainly selected from all the sounds that we'd used and ones we hadn't used. And, folks would listen to the programmers would listen to the different sounds and say, oh, that would be a good sound for this. Or that'd be a good sound for that. I had a lot of fun. I had the most fun when I was working on the sounds for Defender, coming up with little programs that make these various bespoke sounds, like the thrust sound and the explosion sound. And there were a lot of little sound programs that I wrote, but those were only probably half of the sounds. I mean, the other half of the sounds were done by this brilliant synthesizer program that Eugene wrote before I started, called the G-Wave. And G-Wave is like the synthesizer that can make those FM synthesis like sounds that are so familiar from the Williams pinball games, and like half the sounds for Defender.
Well, when you got onto Sinistar, you're working with RJ, Noah Faustine, also Jack Hager, and many more. What was it like working with such an amazingly creative team?
Oh, it was great. I mean, we had I had no experience in doing software with a team of people, but and I don't remember actually how we managed to organize all the work. It was so long ago, and who figured out how we would divvy it up. I mean, I actually all the source code for that leaked a couple of years ago, and so it was fun going back and looking at the software that I wrote so long ago and saying,
I remember that bit.
Yeah, exactly. I don't remember writing that. Where did that come from?
So obviously the digitized voice is somewhat iconic these days. What was the process like? And did people's jaw just hit the floor when they first heard that?
That used the voice chip or technology or whatever. I think that was from Gorgar.
Okay.
It was the pinball, the first talking pinball machine.
Oh wow!
And so it had a very because memory in any form was so expensive and so limited back then. It used a speech compression, some speech compression technology, so it could have compact the voice into a small number of bits. Because we weren't doing any kind of sampling back then. I mean, all those sound effects, the sound effects themselves were synthesized in real time. You know, we would generate a buffer. We'd generate a buffer of audio in whatever number of cycles we could on those really slow, primitive microprocessors. But for the speech, that used basically a technology that was used for communication. For radio. You know, I mean, they probably used it in like radio communication, but it was only designed for voice grade, and so it was a challenge to get a distorted sounding voice out of it, because it was designed to make sounds that you could make with a human voice.
Yeah.
And it scared a generation of kids that her voice did as well.
Yeah, and I think, you know, probably RJ would be the one who would know more about the story. I do remember that we got these really strange sounding voice samples back from a recording session that was done in this. We hired and I think I was the one who remembered his name, John Doremus, who was a voice actor who did a lot of radio commercials, and we hired him to do the voice. And I don't know. I mean, RJ says that I think RJ thinks that he may have made the scream noise, but the spoken parts, like, you know, run, coward, and the voice parts were done by this voice actor. And then we'd run it through some software that would compress it into this format that the speech decoder would decode. But I didn't actually work on that part, so I'm not the person to ask.
What was your favorite part of working on it?
The thing I was most proud of was I wrote kind of a really lightweight operating system that did non-preemptive multitasking and could handle lots of threads, maybe hundreds of threads of program, which was a lot back then. And that's why there were so many, all the different, in Sinistar, all the different ships, the miners and stuff, do these complex sequences of operations where they'll find a planet, they'll shoot at it, they'll collect the crystals, and they'll fly the crystals over to where the Sinistar is being built, and then they'd go and you know, they had all this behavior, but each of them was actually operating as if it was running its own thread, and that was, I think at that time, that was pretty advanced, especially to be running on a you know, such primitive hardware.
Well, talking of multitasking, I was wondering when was the first time you heard about the Amiga?
I was living in Chicago and working for Williams, and Sinistar, the time that when Sinistar came out, it was right at the start of a crash in the coin op industry. Basically, the market was saturated. There weren't any more places to put these multi-$1,000 cabinets. The operators who were our customers, who would buy these machines and you know, and service them at many locations, they did not want to buy any more cabinets. They had no more place to put them. What they wanted were conversion kits, so they could just drop in some new ROMs, maybe even a control panel, and take one of those cabinets and turn it into a brand new game. And that's what they wanted, because it was hundreds of dollars instead of thousands. But that wasn't what Williams or the other manufacturers wanted, because you know, they had grown and expanded their R&D, and you know, they had scaled up for an industry that had now become saturated. So there was, and I saw this coming. I knew that this industry was crashing, and I was looking for something new. I wanted to, and at that time, it was right around the time that I was getting married, and I wanted to settle down and have a family. And I realized that Chicago really wasn't the place for me to do that.
Yeah,
there wasn't the opportunities. I really wanted to move to California, and so actually, I lined up a whole bunch of different interviews at different companies. You know, with my success at Williams, it was pretty easy for me to get, you know, companies, various startup companies were interested in me, and one of those companies was Amiga. It was through my headhunter that I heard about them. He was pretty well connected, but no one knew what they were doing, but it was something interesting. He told me, and that's all we knew. And I went there for an interview and saw what they were doing, and I had already turned down some offers to work on home consoles, because that's where, that's the reason. One of the big reasons why the arcades were dying is that the home consoles were coming out, and kids wouldn't have to go to the arcade and spend all these quarters. They could just buy a cartridge and play the game all they want. But I wasn't interested in the hardware. The Atari hardware or the other hardware systems were vastly inferior to what we had in the arcade consoles, the arcade machines, and the coin-op. But when I went to Amiga, they took me in the back and showed me this whiteboard of the system that they were designing. And I looked at that thing and realized, wow, this is way beyond anything in the arcades. I want to work for this company. They wanted me to be in charge of entertainment software.
Right.
To this day, I really don't like being in charge of a department, and I like to get my hands dirty and be the individual contributor who's writing the code and stuff. And so I kind of didn't do that job, that role real well, but I did a lot of other cool things while I was there.
What was the atmosphere in those early days at Amiga? And did you ever meet Mitchie the dog?
Oh yeah. No, Mitchie was there every day with Jay Miner, but it had a great atmosphere and culture. I mean, and we were real excited about what we were doing. I mean, we were basically making, we thought we were going to make the computer that was going to be. I mean, this was right around the time that the first Macintosh had come out. I think it came out a year before the Amiga, and we thought we were making the next personal computer, or actually at first it was the next home computer, but the company did a slight pivot and shifted focus to being a personal computer with all this incredible graphics and sound capability.
Well, especially with the sound, you were working on the sound drivers and also on the exec. What were the kind of aims for the sound on the Amiga, and what did you folks want to do with it?
Well, for one thing, it did have enough memory that we could do sampling, and it was all based on sampling. We had 4 DACs that basically would read waveforms out of memory and convert them into analog, and those 4 channels were mixed. I don't remember. I think maybe there were 2 on the left and 2 on the right. I can't remember exactly how or whether it was programmable or not. Again, it's been a long time since I've looked at that stuff. But not only that, but they could play. Each of them could play the samples at different sample rates, so we could do different pitches in hardware. That we didn't have to do that sample rate conversion to get different pitches for a sound in software, which would have been very time consuming. We would have taken up a lot of the processor, and so it had its audio hardware was, way ahead of anything else that was in the PC market.
Yeah, it really made it stand out, and I think the boing board demo was a one thing that really stood out, and you were involved with that as well.
Yeah, I worked on a lot of a bunch of the demos, both the different pieces of them. That was probably my favorite job at Amiga was helping make some of the demos that we showed when we first showed the product to
1984 CES trade show.
Yeah, CES trade show. We did it behind the curtain. Yeah, we had a little booth in the back where we invited people that gave them a personal demonstration, and that. We didn't have chips yet, and so we were running the whole thing on wire wrap boards that were in a big package. I think there must have been 10 boards or something we had 4 of them, 5 of them emulating one chip, and and 3 emulating another chip, and basically we had these boards that were chip emulators these circuit boards were maybe 18 inches high and just chock full, packed with they were all wire wrapped, packed with and they just emulated the chips that we were waiting for, that we were designing or were being taped out or whatever. I'm not sure how far along the chips were at the time we first demonstrated it, but they plugged right into the main board, and so we could run the software that we would be running on the Amiga when we had the hardware.
And I heard when we spoke to RJ, he told us, him and Dale, look, it was quite hard to get it all kind of running, and it was like, late story, yeah.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, trying to get that up and running, and there were all kinds of reliability issues with these complicated boards and the wiring, and we were constantly fighting with things, and there was a lot of luck. We got things to work at the last minute. There were a lot of late nights.
And that boing ball sound as well, the when it hits. Where did that come from?
Yeah, I remember that story well. I had an A to D board, analog digital converter board, in an Apple II, and so we ran wires to it. We had a long microphone cable. We ran it out the door and behind the building. There were some big metal garage doors that were at the backs of some of the office buildings, and we had Bob Pariseau, who's the software manager, had these Baticas, and I think we got these. They're like these big foam bats, and I think we got them. I'm not sure if it ever happened, but we were. The story was that I think if we had a disagreement between the hardware team and the software team, we could fight it out with these things. But we went. I don't remember who actually did it, but I remember I digitized it. I don't remember who actually hit the big metal garage door with this foam bat, and it made this bang sound. And then after I digitized it, I don't remember whether I slowed it down to make it lower pitch or cranked up the volume or distorted it or something. But I did some little tricks with it to make it a little more interesting sounding, and that's where how we got the boing sound. So it was just basically a big metal garage door being hit by a foam bat.
That's brilliant. And what was the industry's reaction to Amiga? Like, were they blown away? Were you blown away by it?
Yeah, I think just about everyone who saw it was amazed by it because there was nothing else that was like it available. I mean, they're certainly not targeted to consumers. And it could do hardware line drawing, and it could even do hardware shading of polygons, and it had a hardware windowing system where you could do like vertical windows, and that RJ took advantage of when he wrote Intuition. I wasn't at Amiga that long after we shipped. I think I left the company maybe 6 months later.
So you still work at Apple as a senior audio software engineer.
Oh yeah, there was a 28-year gap there.
Yeah, we definitely need to do like a part 2 with you to fill in that.
I was going to say, Ravi's done the questions here, and it literally goes from like 1985, 2024.
Yeah, there were. I had a couple of. I did a few fun things during that gap.
So I'll tell you what, Sam, if you're up for it, we will 100% do a part 2 with you because this has been absolutely fantastic.
Oh, great. I'm glad you liked it. Yeah. I'm glad that I was able to tell you some stories that I can remember.
Well, we were just finally wondering what really excites you about audio nowadays.
Oh, well, what happened after I left Apple. Well, a couple years later, there's some more stories in there, which I'll gladly share with you. But eventually, I decided to completely devote myself to audio because that had been my music and sound had been my hobby since I was a child, and I loved doing anything with audio, and so I got back into it, and And again, you're going to have to hear some stories. I mean, I was one of the main engineers on the with the Sound Blaster sound card.
Yes, at Creative Labs. Yeah,
Creative Labs. The whole EAX, environmental audio stuff that they developed, which became very, very much affected the development of sound in games. I did 3D audio. I did reverberation, artificial reverberation. It was really fascinating stuff. And Creative had a great team that was designing audio chips.
Well, we could do a whole episode on Sound Blaster. I think that could be great.
Yeah, and then that really cemented my focus on audio. I mean, to this day, now the whole explosion with VR and augmented reality, it never gets boring.
Yeah, spatial audio and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, Sam, it's been amazing to have you on, and we'll have you on again. And thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.